Hi everyone. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the guy that does the LV1 and Ego 11 conversions for people. I've since stopped doing the Ego 11 conversions just because I'm unable to get the manifolds, but I'm still doing the LV1 conversions, and I've gotten a lot of questions about what it is specifically that I do, if people can have more close-ups of the marker, what am I changing on it aside from just saying I made modifications. So I'm going to go into a little bit about that here, and just kind of give you guys an overview, and then I will show you as I'm going through and modifying it what I've changed, what steps I took, and that should hopefully give a little bit of a better look into the conversion that I've been doing for people. So the first thing is this is the Ego LV1.6 manifold. This is what we will be primarily modifying in order to make the solenoid mesh up on here. So these back two holes here actually line up perfectly with the LV1.1's mounting screws. You can see that here, hopefully. But the issue occurs when you try to get this forward screw in line here. This manifold is a little bit longer than the one that is currently on the LV1.1. And so we're going to need to trim back this area here and then move the hole further in. So that's possible. It comes a little tight to this vent port here, but it really doesn't matter where it's venting. So if you nick it, don't really worry about that. I get it pretty thin, but yeah, it's not critical. It won't matter. So all good on that front. Since we're using the 1.6 and LV2 manifold, we use the same gaskets from them. Obviously, this manifold is designed to match up to the LV2 solenoid that we'll be using. So no worries there. Where it is a little bit intriguing is this LV1.6 manifold gasket. So what happens with this is the holes, thankfully, are in the same exact place between the two manifolds. So they are going to operate pretty much the same. The only difference is their gaskets are a little bit different. You can see this kind of like bump here. That's for the screw hole. So the screw holes are kind of just a little different, and one, as I said, is longer than the other. So this gasket seems to be a little bit longer, and it's just generally a tiny bit of a different shape. So thankfully that doesn't affect anything, because the only thing that matters is that it lines up with the ports that go into the frame, or the upper frame of the marker. So that said, we're going to be completely taking out everything here. The only thing we're going to be using from this assembly is the mounting screws here, here, and here. So I'll take video of what I'm doing when I'm modifying that manifold for you guys. It'll be later on in the video. But yeah, so now let's take a look at the frame. So interesting things to note with this frame. Planet Eclipse does a really good job of making their stuff super compact, super tight packaging, really nice. Makes it a little bit more difficult to modify them. So you can kind of see that lip there on the inside that sits underneath the manifold and has holes for the manifold screws. We're going to be trimming that way down when we do this conversion. Thankfully, it doesn't seem to be detrimental to the structural integrity of the frame. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit weaker, but there's not a lot of pressure on the frame back there in that area, and it's really just to keep dust out. So no issues there. The second thing we're going to be doing is, I don't know if you can see it here, but over by the trigger frame, it curves in a little bit in that hole for the solenoid. So I'm going to be moving those back just to give it a little bit of extra space, since we are going from a cylindrical shape to the more square shape of the LV2 solenoid there. That's going to be important as well. Now, as I said earlier, the manifold for the LV2 and LV1.6 is a little bit longer, so I like to trim some of this tubing off. It's probably not necessary. You just might deal with it catching a little bit or getting in the way, but not a big deal. Pretty easy. You just take an X-Acto knife, make a nice clean cut, and you shouldn't have any issues. So I'm gonna go ahead and disassemble this, take out the board and everything, all of the filter for the ASA, pop that off, take out the screen, and all the grips as well. That'll be so that we can go back and make our cuts into the frame here to fit the solenoid and manifold. So I will see you guys when I go do that. Okay, so just an idea of what I'm doing here before I go to mill it. I marked off with black Sharpie kind of where I'm going to be milling out. So it's going to be on both sides. You can see it lines up and clears the screw here, and these are all in line as well. So I'm going to have to do that on both sides. You can see this lip here. That'll need to be removed in order to allow it to fit tightly onto here. So I'm going to do the top first, and then I'll come back and I will mark the bottom and mill out there. Okay, so you guys can see I've got this set up here. I used a feeler gauge to get it just off of the edge on both sides. So when we start, we won't have any issues with that. Now, what I'm using for this is the 1/8 inch end mill. So it's really 3 inches long, which is really nice. It gives you a little extra clearance, and it's also what I'll be using to mill the frame. And you can see I've got this set up here on some parallel blocks, so that's just helpful. It helps keep it level across the entire vise. So this is what I'll be doing. As I said earlier, I'm going to be going to that black mark there and then coming out to clear off the excess material. Okay, so you can see there where I made the clearance. It's pretty clean, pretty happy with it. I'm not sure if you can quite tell from this angle, but you can see there's a little tiny bit of material left there. Again, it gets pretty close, but if you go through that, it doesn't really matter. It won't make much of a difference. So, all right, time to flip it over and do the other side. So you can see here I used a ball nose mill. And what I did was I drilled my hole down through the piece with the edge of the radius tangent to that mark that I made on the inside. And then after that, I did one hole in the center and then did a pass back and forth just to clean up any of the edges there. So this is about done. I'm gonna go clean it off. Okay, cool. So now we've got this milled out. Looks pretty clean. So I'm gonna attach it here and then we'll see, just make sure it sits flush. Looks like it does. I don't really see any major issues. So should be good to go with that. Real quick, I'll just screw it in, make sure. But you can see here, we've got it aligned with the screw pretty perfectly, so should be good to go. Okay, so now you can see that I've got the frame up here. Again, I'm using that 3/8 inch, 3-inch end mill, and we're gonna take out some material in this corner here. Okay, so now that everything's on, we've got our manifold, our solenoid, and the trim tube on there. And then on here, we have trimmed down, as we said, the back there, as well as the tabs in the front. One thing to note is that these little tabs that stick out where the solenoid sits on the LV1.6 and LV2 manifold, those actually are in the way, so we have to trim those even further down. So, like I said, I'm gonna put this thing together and see if it holds some air. Okay, so we just finished up milling the frame. So you can see here, we took off quite a bit, but that'll give us enough clearance, and obviously, I mean, it's not going anywhere even with that material removed, and there's nothing much going on back there with the marker, so not too worried about it. Works just fine. And then you can see we also took off those tabs that were in the front there and gave it a little bit of extra room for the solenoid. So we're gonna put it all together now and just make sure that it all lines up correctly. So now that it's fully assembled, I've got a tank on here and we just gotta make sure that it'll air up fine. So no leaks at all. Last steps will be to put back the screen, the buttons, and the cover, as well as the board and trigger, and then we'll just put the grips back on and send it back. So she should be good to go. Yeah, but But if you guys have any questions, feel free to put a comment or send me a message. Just let me know.